Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I'm your host Paul O'Need, and today I am joined by, a longtime friend. We met a long time ago.
Yeah.
Probably, I'm trying to think actually. I think probably 2017,
Yeah,
2018-ish.
right in that wheelhouse for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan Gregnol. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to
It's my
be here.
pleasure. My pleasure. So Ryan and I reconnected a couple weeks ago. He was in town for a conference, and for those of you who don't know, Ryan is a long drive competitor. He's been a 10-time world champion competitor, 4-time top 16, 2-time Canadian long drive champion. And for those who don't know what long drive is, you just fucking smack the shit out of a golf ball, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nuance of it when I first started. That was my like whole like, yeah, okay, like I wasn't good enough to play. Like I could play all right. I got down to a scratch and whatever, but to make money, nah, I wasn't. Admittedly, wasn't good enough. And then this whole like thing, I found it on the internet, and I used to watch it on Christmas Day, and it was just like, okay, let's give it a go. And that's kind of where it all got started.
So you didn't even start as like a golf player.
I did. Yeah, I
Okay.
golfed. I golfed in my teenage years. I started right around the Tiger Woods era, like 96, 97.
Okay.
So that was let's hit the shit out of it and go find it. Hope for the best. And
The way I still play.
yeah, and that was, obviously the first couple years was a little rough, but just like anything else, I started taking it a little more seriously, got down to a scratch golfer by the time I was 18, won my men's club championship. And not that that's a big deal for the town I grew up in, but for me, I was like, oh, cool, we're going somewhere. And then you go to the big cities and you start to realize there's a lot more that needs to be done. And when you only have 4 months of summer up in Thunder Bay, you're pretty, especially back then with technology and stuff, you're pretty limited to what's available.
So, from competing in golf at a young age, I mean, we met when you were powerlifting,
Yeah.
which, I mean, you're 6'5".
Yeah. Oh, it's probably 6'4" now, but back then, yeah.
Yeah, so 6'5", competing in powerlifting, and then all of a sudden I see you posting long drive stuff. Like, can you give us a bit of a background of like, what that fitness transition has been like for you?
Yeah, so I competed in long drive from 2008 till about 2014. And when I first started, prize money was really good. I didn't understand the work ethic. I didn't understand, like all the nuances that went into it. And I was good enough to get by, qualify for worlds, win a couple small tournaments, but that was really it. I wasn't at that elite level. I was kind of that mid-range guy. Um, and then the sport just kind of fell off. Sponsors fell off, so our dollar kind of started going the other way too. So that was a big part of it for me at that time. And then I randomly just decided I was gonna start trying powerlifting, and just my competitive self was just like, okay, like I understood my place. Like I knew at 6'5" and 245, I wasn't gonna be doing anything crazy or setting any records, but I think that's what I enjoyed about it. You were kind of just beating yourself every
Hmm.
time you tried to get up there on the platform, and I did beat myself a bunch and I hurt myself a bunch, and like we all do.
Oh yeah.
Um, but that the discipline, it was the first time I'd ever hired a coach for anything.
Okay.
Um, so that the discipline of that really took me like, okay, program, follow, 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 and understanding what it really took to be competitive. Not that I was overly competitive in powerlifting, but I tried to be. So that was kind of one injury after another. Um, we were at the CPF Canadian Championships in
Hmm.
Barrie when we did like the whole night extravaganza, whatever it was. And I kind of tore my TFL on my last squat on the way down. Stood up with it. I don't think they should have gave it to me, but they did.
That's
Um,
CPF.
yeah, that's yeah. So I finished the meet. Didn't really do anything else I really wanted to. The rest of the meet, obviously, stiff legged, like 580, and just walked out and was like, okay.
Hmm.
And then it was okay, we have two choices. We bulk up to like 280 plus, which at even at where I was off season 255, I wasn't overly comfortable.
Hmm.
Just the way my body's built. Obviously, we've met, I'm all legs and arms, and it doesn't really bode well for powerlifting.
No.
um, so then there randomly was a long drive event, and at this time now I lived in Southern Ontario, and it was an hour from my house. So I made a couple calls, borrowed a couple clubs, went and hit it 409 yards or something like that, and I was hooked all over again. And it was just like I look at my swing from that day and I laugh because it was like no rotation, just muscling it out there. Um, Obviously, there was probably some ground help because it was pretty dry, and but it was like that, it hooked me again, and now I was like, okay, like what do we got to do? Like what's the steps to get to the next level here in the time I was trying. I was also getting my real estate license. So there was a lot going on. I ended up getting my TPI, which is our Titleist Performance Institute
Yep.
certificates. So I got the level one and then the power two on the recommendation of Jason Zubak, who's a six-time champion, five-time open, one-time senior division champion, kind of like our greatest. He's our Ed Cohen,
Oh,
essentially,
very cool.
to kind of put it in powerlifting perspectives. So he became a mentor of mine, which was, the better I got, the more of a mentor he became. And now we talk basically every week on the phone for at least an hour, hour and a half, just shooting ideas back and forth. But yeah, over that time, the powerlifting, I think, created the discipline to be able to train appropriately how I needed to train. And obviously, there were steps and learning curves along the way that came along with that too, right? Not, you don't have to go all out all the time. You don't have to go full gas on every training session. You don't have to hit balls at 120% every time you go hit balls. And yeah, it just became this, and then COVID hit. So there was these ups and downs that came along with it. But eventually in 2019, I made my first top 16, my first televised event. Kind of got mentally played on that one, which I'll give the guy all the credit in the world for. He mentally got to me, and I'm like, after the fact, I'm like, okay, my whole speed journey came from that conversation. I wrote a whole blog about it. And it
Hmm.
was essentially we were warming up on the driving range beside each other because it was, the top guys that were going that night. And I hit one and I kind of heard him, and mind you, he was a two-time world champion himself. And
Okay.
I kind of heard him mutter under his breath, "You're going to need more than that." And I was like, yep, yep, I probably do. Like in reality right now, like I know my place. But after that event, I kind of took that as okay, that no one's gonna be able to say that to me again. Like
Mm.
I'm gonna be the one that's not ever gonna say it because that's not who I am. But without saying it, people will know.
Mm.
So I went on this speed journey of trying to get as fast as I possibly could. COVID hits, kind of puts a little backstop on that, but we kind of had pillars at the time where um, we ran everything on like a ball speed, like our golf ball velocity. So if you
Okay.
were at, to break in, you kind of had to be 200 miles an hour. And then to get to where I was at the time, you were like 210, 212. 220 was kind of the elite barrier. And so I spent probably 2 months, 3 months right after that getting to 220 miles an hour. And so I was like, okay, I got comeback player of the year and all these like they were player awards voted on by the players, but I was like,
Mhm.
okay, like we're respected. And at the time I was 37, I think, 36, 37. So not exactly a young buck by any
Mhm.
means. Um, we have so we could kind of move forward. The 2020 season was kind of a write-off. We did the Canadian Championships. I'd won that. 2022, 21 with the border opened, I believe, in August. So we held the World Championships in September. I prepped for a month. I made top 16. I ended up on the tee box beside Bryson DeChambeau. Earlier in the week, I kind of tweaked my adductor.
Mhm.
I was wearing a pair of shoes that were kind of square toed, and we hit off artificial turf.
Okay.
Turf don't give like grass. So the way I was swinging, it just kind of like kept like pulling and pulling and pulling, and then Basically, I kept getting through, but I kept feeling it. And the night before the top 16, it basically like shot up, went through my psoas nerve, like my back lit up, my QL lit up, and I'm in the shower, just like hot water, hoping for the best. And then I was one swing away from making the top eight, basically.
Oof.
The winner of our last set would have won or would have went to the final eight. On the third swing, my adductor longus tore off the insertion. And down I go. My tournament's over. Bryson DeChambeau standing beside me, and he's like, "What do I do?" I'm like, "Just keep hitting, bro. Like, there's nothing else you could do right now. Like, just keep going. I got to get picked up and taken off the tee box." In shock, basically, because at that point we don't know if it's just muscle or tendon or both, kind of thing. So that was kind of my next little wake up call to like, okay, there's you got to take care of everything, not just, the big things. You got to take care of all the little things. So I went on another little journey of recuperation. Thankfully, I had a great physio that dealt with a lot of hockey players at depth training in Waterloo. And so right away we started working on it, and I was back to squatting within 8.5, 9 weeks.
Oh, that's
Uh,
very, very fast.
yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, obviously I did everything I could. Like, we didn't leave
Yeah.
any stones unturned. Um, but even as I was going in, he was like, "You're ahead of schedule. You're ahead of schedule. You're ahead of schedule." I'm like, "Okay, let's just keep rocking." I wasn't babying it. They gave me morphine. I took that for a day, and I'm like, "No, this is stupid. Like, I shouldn't be able to stand up right now. Like,
Mhm.
that's not." So I basically I took it pretty. It hurt. I'm like, not gonna lie, it hurt a lot. But I was like, "Hey, I can't just medicate this. Like, we need to let it heal and do it properly, or else I'm not gonna have full function of it."
Mhm.
So push on into February. By then, there had been two guys in the world that went 230 miles an hour ball speed. Kyle Berkshire, who's probably the most popular right now, probably the best in the world as far as I'm concerned,
Mhm.
and my friend Martin Borgmeyer from Germany, also world champion in the following year, 2022. So here I am, 38 at the time, and I'm like, I'm gonna give it a go. Like, I feel good. I'm training my ass off from this recovery situation, and I think by the first week of April, I got to 230, and so I was the third person ever to do that. And then fast forward, we keep going, have another couple good years. 2022, I had the second highest ball speed average on tour. Going into 23, and then, oh no, sorry, 23. I decided, okay, 2022 was a good year. I think I finished inside of the top 16 at almost every event. I went on a run where I finished in the top 16 of every event for like 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so I never broke through. Like, I got into like top four, won another Canadian championship, but never, like, there was that little, just, it was more mental than anything. And I know that. More of a mental case than a physical problem. So we took that, and then we set our sight on setting the world ball speed record. Because it was just one of those male ego things where I'm like, hey, I only got so many years left, and I'm gonna give this a go. And I took an 8 week planned out training block, everything, sleep, the breath work, stretching, mobility, training, everything was laid out. And a week before my 40th birthday, I broke the record at 236.6 miles per hour. And it was short lived because a bunch of other guys kind of saw I was going to do this, and they saw me slowly climbing up from 31, 32, 33, 34, because just progression, like progressive overload, it's basically the same concept. And so I kind of knew my time frame, and a couple other guys were kind of doing the same thing, doing the same thing. And so I held the record for 48 hours, and then I broke it by point one. This specimen of a guy, if I had to build him in a lab in Australia, basically came. Oh, I give him all, like, there's things you can just do at 6'7" and 250. Like,
Holy
it's
shit. Big
and
lad.
and an ex like baseball pitcher, so he has all the rotation plus the work ethic. Like the kid's a specimen. So he breaks it by point one, and then Kyle, who had held the record for seemingly the last 3.5 years, was like, "Well, I can't let you guys do that." So then he gets going, and he goes point one more. I think the world record changed hands 4 times in 5 days.
I love that shit.
Yeah, and we called it like the craziest week in long drive because it was just like I do it. Sebastian Twiddell, who's the kid from Australia, did it. Kyle did it. Martin's over in Germany. Martin and I are really, really good friends, so I knew he was up to something. And then Saturday morning, my phone rang, which would have been Saturday afternoon in Germany, and it's him. And I'm like, "What'd you do?" Like,
Yeah.
so he went next level. He went 239.2 or something.
Holy
So
shit.
we were going by like point one, point one, point one, and then he just kind of blew it out of the water. I gave it one more go the following week. I got to 237.1, and then I'm like, my body's trashed. Like I knew my CNS was done. I was losing weight literally every week, eating 4,500 calories a day, still losing, and I'm like, I can't. There's no more I can give. Like I'm gonna
Mm.
crash my whole season now based on what we just tried to do. Like if I was 25, okay, probably a little bit different. But at just turning 40 years old at that point, I was like, hey, like I got to pull away. I got to back off. But yeah, that was, we just kind of kept pushing. That was the year I had the second highest ball speed average on tour. Finished, I think my end of the year ranking was top nine. And yeah, that brought us to last year. Last year was a little iffy, had some personal things, and then TFC injury in my wrist in June, which we just got the MRA back yesterday. um, so yeah, but that's kind of been the 7 8 year run, 5 6 years, seven whatever it is now. I can't even remember. I'm old age kicking in. But yeah, that's kind of been the progression, and now I've kind of turned more into I'm still going to compete, but more of a coach mentor type of role for the next up and coming group of guys.
Which I'm really glad that we went into such detail on the story because I think our story ultimately dictates where we take whatever our passion is as we move forward. Um, just from my own knowledge, when we talk about ball speed, how does ball speed correlate to? Is it like a direct correlation to distance, assuming weather conditions are, or
It's it's
or is
it's
it trajectory? Like,
Yeah, so our biggest dictating factors, obviously, weather is first and foremost, right? Like
yep.
if the wind's blowing dead in our face, if it's blowing straight behind us, if we're at altitude, if we're in Colorado versus say Florida, um, all these factors. Like I've hit balls 457 yards in Colorado, and I've hit balls 415 yards in Florida, and the ball I hit in Florida, I know I hit way better.
Mm.
So it's just a matter of where you are, what the conditions are like. But if we were like completely neutral conditions and I had to put parameters, ball speed, launch angle, spin rate, those are your kind of like three big factors in what we're looking at. Then there's other little nuances that you can get into a little deeper with, spin loft and stuff like that. But that's getting very, very, very like in the weeds with it.
That's what I find so interesting, though, because with a sport like this, and I would equate it similar to powerlifting, right? Because everything is fixed. It's the same ball. You said you're hitting off turf, so it's the same surface.
Yep.
But there's a lot of different environmental conditions that you don't necessarily have control over. Like in powerlifting, you've got the crowd, you've got the lights, you've got the judges, you've got all this sort of stuff. But the weights are the same, so it's the same ball. Is there standardization of the equipment that you can use? I'm sure there's like rules around,
Yeah. So
club
we
height. Yeah.
Yeah, we have club length. So we're at USGA max, 48 inches, and club heads have to be conforming on the USGA list. Now, there's one thing that we used to have that we no longer have, and that's what we call CT testing. It's essentially the coefficient of the ball springing off the face. And
Mm.
so it's legal. Like on the PJ Tour, they have it. We used to have it in 2019, but in my experience, it doesn't correlate when you're above 150 miles an hour, anyways, because you actually need a lower CT than maximum. because the metal's reflection or deflection. You're moving it so fast that if you had max amount deflection, it would almost sit on the face for too long
Right.
and it wouldn't spring off fast enough. It's highly debated, but we've gone down some rabbit holes. Even you, if the people that are listening, if they watch golf at all, they've probably seen Bryson DeChambeau talk about bulge and roll and stuff like that recently in the past year with his crank driver. And Crank was one of my first sponsors, and so we used to test our heads because he has one of those machines. Because you're as a manufacturer, you're allowed to have one. And so how we would work it, he would have it in the back of his SUV at tournaments. And so we would kind of go from the range and we'd go to the back of the SUV, we'd put our heads and get them tested. So in 2019, for the ball we were using, because the ball does play a factor, um, my CT, so the legal limit's 242 plus 13
Okay.
or plus 242 plus 15. So 257 is technically like top of the line. Um, so I was swinging between 140 to 142 miles an hour at the time. We wanted my CT to be around 239, 240. Whereas Kyle Berkshire, who is swinging 150 miles an hour, actually wanted a lower number at about 232, 233 because the higher the number he had, the longer the ball would sit on the face and the slower the ball would actually end up coming off. So we really fine tuned it. And it's, again, this is all highly debated by guys, but when I was working with him, it was like, no, this is how we do it. And I'm like, well, you've been doing it for 25 years. I'm not going to argue with you, kind of thing. Like,
Well, we're also not physics majors.
well, that's the other side of it. I'm just like, okay, you own the company, you want to win. You're not going to give me something that's not the best. So
Right.
now, obviously, the ball has changed multiple times since then. So you kind of have to ride in that wheelhouse of how hard the ball is versus how hard the driver is versus how hard you're swinging.
It's
So,
so interesting. And then you mentioned then you also have spin rate.
yeah.
Is that something that you can control with your swing?
Um, yes, with so the launch angle and your angle of attack, depending on how you deliver the club, can dictate your spin loft. Your spin loft will then, it's kind of like, say you're hitting a hammer on a nail head, right? You just kind of glance that nail head a little bit, your smash factor is going to go down. So the spin rate's likely going to go up because you're just glancing it a little. Now, when we say we go to Colorado, where the air is thinner, we actually want to be able to spin the ball a little bit more to hold it in the air longer. So it really gets like when we get down to like the top, I'll say 16 guys, we're finicky as finicky can get. Like we're a bunch of prima donnas up there where like we have seven, eight, nine clubs, all different weights, all different setups. We have our like competition one, then we have our practice one, we have our downwind one, we have our headwind one. Like we get pretty I can't even say pretty finicky. That's just too light of a word. We get very,
Obsessive.
very anal about exactly what we need for that time.
Well,
And
but
I've been on
you
the tee box where I've literally like I've switched because the wind changed because we get 2 minutes and 30 seconds to hit a ball, and you'll be at some of these events in the desert and the wind will change in 10 seconds and you're like, hey, and you just run, grab your other club that's behind you, and then hit that and hope you hit it well on that swing. And if you don't, you don't, but you gave yourself the best odds.
is this it's so fascinating to me because like I come from like I've coached throwers and I think
Right.
that would probably be the closest you could get. Like I coached a jav guy for a really long time as a Canadian national champion. And we would always talk about, okay, how long is the javelin in your hand? How are you timing your hip extension with your arm swing? And especially when it comes to rotational sports, you've got all those kinetic chains involved with, creating torque, also creating stability in certain areas and freedom in other areas. Um, you mentioned like a long string of injuries that kind of led you down a rabbit hole. And for those who aren't familiar, TPI is like the golf training certification that you can get. So the fact that you went and got that just as a means to improve your own performance
Yeah.
speaks volumes. Like How did your training start to change as you went deeper into that rabbit hole?
Whoa. So obviously, fatigue management became a huge factor for me. Understanding obviously powerlifting, we knew the slight differences between strength, power, and hypertrophy,
Yeah.
but we're never working with implements that weighed 300 grams, right? So
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like the ball is so small, the club head is relatively light. Then you've got different club like flex rates, I'm sure, and tensile strengths,
yeah.
plus how strong you are. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, so it really came down to um, you had to understand the power dynamic that you're trying to create is much different than, the closest I could get was throwing a 5 ounce baseball, right?
Okay.
That would the relativeness of rotation, which makes sense because we have a multitude of world champions that were pitchers that came from a pitching background.
Okay.
And so I altered my training to the point where if obviously I never try to mimic my golf swing in the gym. That's pointless. But the rotational aspects of power were what could I throw, rotational med ball wise that was light enough to create the same kinetic movement that I would need to swing a golf club.
Right.
So we got down to a 2 pound med ball, monitored on radar, which I was fortunate enough to have a baseball gym that now one of my good friends, he actually owns it. And we kind of like, he wanted to get into long drive. I wanted to learn how to throw without blowing my elbow out. So I'm like, okay, let's just trade this off. And then we put together, a style of program that I was only hitting golf balls once a week.
Oh wow.
And it was more of learning to rotate, learning to use that kinetic chain, and then I would kind of develop my own kind of system within that, where I went down the rabbit hole. Like I went into like not just throwing baseballs and med balls, but like disc golf frisbees and things, yeah, things that I needed to be able to throw with my left arm because I could only throw a baseball with my right arm, but the left arm in the golf swing is still very dominant. So I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, how can I load that across the chest with something light enough that I could still have the same kinetic movement? And then I got into, okay, well, a disc golf frisbee, you can get them from 240 grams to 260, 70, 80. They have, I didn't even know, but they have like different ones for different lengths of throwing and stuff in disc golf and all this. So I'm like, okay, so I bought a set of those. And then obviously the gym had light, heavy balls and things like that for plyo throws. The decelerators was a huge factor
Okay.
for avoiding injury. So a lot of reverse throwing and stuff like that, and then like throw and holds kind of thing. But yeah, I didn't leave any as far as like my knowledge and as far as I could go with it. Um, I went a few months without doing any maximal lifting because I wasn't concerned about my strength at all. I'm like, I don't need to squat 400 pounds to swing a 300-gram club.
Right.
It's just not relevant right now. So I broke the 230 yard or 230 mile an hour barrier hitting once a week and training just like that. And then the following season we altered it even a little bit more where I was even training less and just doing a lot more plyo and power work when it came like I would do some hypertrophy strength work November, December just to bandage up the system from the season. And then we went into like the power and explosive stuff, but it wouldn't be something you would use outside of golf because
Right.
it's just there's nothing like even a javelin's much heavier than that, right? Like you're not getting into that light power explosiveness like you would with a golf club.
It strikes me as really cool that you are only swinging once a week with a sport that is so skill based and like your swing has to be like incredibly refined.
I think I kind of have like when I did the presentations while I was in Ottawa, right? So
Hmm.
I kind of have my pillars, right? My pyramid, we'll call it, where we always have a foundation where, in most sports we consider our foundation our strength base, where I was like, no, your mechanics of your swing are your foundation. If your mechanics suck, then you can't build anything on top of it. So if there's kinks in the swing because of lack of strength in certain areas, then okay, you can train those. But if the mechanics themselves are out of whack, it's just like someone they got massive legs and can't squat worth shit because their mechanics in the squat are awful, right?
Right.
And then you teach them the proper mechanics, and all of a sudden they jump 200 pounds, and it's like, oh, well, it was always there. You just didn't know how to use it.
Hmm.
And that was a big thing I took away from powerlifting because obviously, you know, my legs, they're not exactly big. At 6'4", I don't have legs, and you know, I had to learn how to do everything mechanically as well as I could, just to,
Right.
you know, to get to that 620 number that I was trying to get to. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get any bigger, like unless I get up to like the 280 mark. So like
Hmm.
my technique has to be perfect or
Right.
nearly perfect. Um, so I kind of went with the same principles in golf. I was lucky enough to have good mechanics from a history of being a good player, and then understanding angles and the kinetic stuff that I learned at TPI. Because I learned using the ground was probably the best, most important, best money I've ever spent as far as all this training, learning the
Hmm.
kinetic movement and then the kinematic movement of the golf club itself. So those were a couple things where I was like, you know, preaching to people. I'm like, if you want to really get involved, like spend a little bit of money on those couple things, and the amount you can learn from it, you know, it'll save you, you know, that's, we'll call it $500. That's 5 lessons at a golf teacher,
Right.
right? And that's in the long run of things, that's nothing. And I
Hmm.
think the other side of it is for me, still haven't had a golf coach ever. Um,
Wild.
it was kind of the stubbornness and growing up where I did, where it wasn't available. I
Hmm.
remember having one teacher sit behind me at a driving range one time, and this was pre-cameras, pre, you know, quality stuff. And he was like, I don't know, I can't tell. He's like, you're swinging too fast. I was like, well, okay, I guess I got to figure it out through feel and through my own knowledge and through how I look at it. And now when I coach, it's I see things so much differently because I know what I'm looking for specifically as far as pressures and angles and where the kinetics are going. And I'm like, well, okay, you're outside of your left foot, so you can't push into your hip socket if you're outside of your left foot. Be no different than, you know, someone squatting and, you know, the pressures and angles going outside of the hip joint where it's like, well,
Hmm.
okay, you're leaking gas, like you're not throwing through the floor where you need to.
Right.
So that's where it kind of all came full circle, right? And it was like now for me, you know, through all of this, we're lucky enough the golf industry is tech savvy now and
Oh yeah.
it's going through the roof, right? So we have all this force plate data that we can look at and accumulate, and so that was another thing. I'm like, okay, I had a friend that works at King Valley, just north of Toronto, and they have a swing catalyst, which at the time was kind of still is the top tier data collection force plate in the industry. There's a couple now, but at the time that one was it. And so I was on it in 2019 and learned a couple things. And then I went back when I was swinging really, really, really well because I'm like, well, I want to see what's happening now. Like, why am I swinging well? Like, what's
Mm.
happening in the ground? And we come to find out that I had the highest vertical force ever created on that machine worldwide. And I guess the owner of the company came in the following week, or like the head scientist was coming in to give a talk the following week, and they showed him, and he's like, "Oh, is that like some 25-year-old freak athlete?" They're like, "No, that's some broken ass 40-year-old." But I just learned how to use the you know, my lower half properly and send the signal through the right pathways. And then we get into, I mean, the cerebral cortex messaging the body and sending the signal clear through the system. And that's a whole nother book on baseball that I actually was reading. And then I correlated that to golf as well. Whereas when people are making too many changes, the signal that never actually gets sent
Hmm.
through a smooth highway. It's always like hitting bumps and hitting stuff along the way. So you can't actually get faster because the message isn't getting through quick enough. And we're talking 1 second here of a golf swing. So
Oh, fuck, milliseconds.
yeah, so that's where when guys, there's these systems out there that are being, they're sold and it is what it is, these speed training systems, and the progressions happen in the first 6 weeks, and I'm like, well, yeah, because that's just the signal sending the highway, like through the highway, better. You didn't get stronger. It's like training in the gym for 6 weeks. Like how much strength you actually get versus the system actually just understanding the load that you're putting on it and learning to move that load efficiently without all the hiccups and stuff along the way.
Well, absolutely. That motor learning is probably the most important thing to learn as a young athlete, regardless of what sport
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
doing. It's a skill, and I've always looked at strength in that same way. Strength is a skill. It's your ability to express force within a fixed movement pattern. One of the things when we were chatting in the gym the other day, you were talking about how you kind of adapted traditional periodization models into the way that you coach swinging.
Yep.
So you were talking about like sub-maximal swings, manipulating volumes and intensities over time. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I got really into Charlie Francis's high-low method, and obviously there's not as much how can we say it, sheer force being put on the body through a golf
Yep.
swing as there is through sprinting. So obviously, like Charlie went anything above 90 to 95, never really went beyond that. And then his low days were very low. Whereas when I'm bringing guys through my system of training, obviously the motor learning component, I try to keep them in that 93, 92% of what their fastest swing would be at the time. And
And
to
you're using like
radar.
a radar. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. That's it. All my guys, I try to have them hit on radar as every session they can.
So
Um,
cool. Okay.
and that way that was another big factor for me because I was very numbers driven. So if I saw the number climbing in the beginning when I didn't know any better, it just forced me to like, hey, more, how can I get more, how can I get more, which in the end I burnt out a lot of the time and I didn't really understand why. And so now when I'm training my guys in the off season, you can still make progress below 100% even though the implement is so light. My numbers are just a little higher based on the implement being so much lighter. So essentially, right, as we build through and we go to like, let's just say stage 2 of prep, now they'll go to like 95, 96, but they'll get 15 to 20 swings at 100 at the end. And that's more of, okay, well, I don't need you beating yourself up, but I just want you to be able to feel. And then for myself, just like, in powerlifting, we can't see a squat breakdown at sub 80%, even at 90%. We kind of need to see that threshold number of what breaks down when we're trying to hit a 1 rep max or very close to a 1 rep max, what falls apart. So that's where I give them that green light to do their 15 to 20 swings after they've prepped for 6 to 8 weeks in that 92, 93% mark. And then, I can start to see, okay, what's working in the gym? What can we go back to in the gym? Or if we need to go back to anything, what can we work on? Or is it a technical aspect? Are you weak somewhere in the body, or is it somewhere in your swing that your kinetics are messed up and we need to focus on that? Are your feet weak, right? Are you collapsing your arches and that's why your feet are rolling? Like there's certain aspects when I'm looking at it from, because I've just ground up from everything, because if you can't get the ground right, then you're just leaking gas no matter what. So, I go through the whole gamut, and sometimes the guys are like, "Does this matter?" I'm like,
Everything matters.
if it didn't, I wouldn't talk about it. I'm not trying to sound smart. I'm not trying to sound in like it's how I looked at everything. Like, I went through the whole rolling the towel up with the toes, like just because my arches were flat, and or my left foot was flat, my right foot was fine because I loaded it so hard, so it remained a lot stronger. But then I came to, okay, well, if I land on my left, right on the inner ball of my left foot, I can't then, and we learned this through being on the Swing Catalyst data collection plate, that if my ankle just rolled like this, I would lose 40%. I'd go from 340 to 300 just if it rolled that much because it leaked just a hair outside instead of driving it up into the pelvis. It drove it out on like the lateralis, essentially.
Mm.
So now I'm working with one quad muscle that isn't big to begin with, so I need to use all of them in order to create what I can. Some guys with bigger legs would likely get away with it a bit better, but I'm like, if I can get you, who already has a strong strength base and strong legs, to use all four of your quads inside your adductors, so on and so forth, the pressure gets up through the chain, out to the hands, and out to the club a lot better. So yeah, the training percentages, obviously low days are basically like off days.
Yeah.
Um, they can go do some modality work and stuff like that, recovery stuff, stretching, depending
Hmm.
on where they're weak. But when we're in season, I don't have them in the gym more than twice a week. Um, which now this gets a little different. Um, remember how I told you I didn't hit any golf balls for like 5 months?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got coaxed into hitting golf balls when I was at the expo.
Okay.
And I had a buddy bring up some clubs. And I haven't got off the couch to hit a golf ball since the end of October when I was at King Valley doing like a shoe photo thing.
Hmm.
And within 20 minutes, I was 150 miles an hour and 220 miles an hour. And I've been doing nothing but hypertrophy training as
Yeah,
we
because
talked.
you're going to compete in a show soon.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of like, okay, so my mechanics haven't changed. Like
Right.
they're standard. I haven't really done any stretching. I haven't really done, but because it's been so ingrained for so many years, now the like the bands, we'll just call it like the elastic bands, the
Hmm.
tensile strength of the joints and ligaments are tight enough to still get where they need to,
Hmm.
but taut enough to get recoiled without any, like I wasn't even, obviously my cardiovascular health is pretty good right now.
Yeah.
So I had no issues. And I was like, I kind of laughed. I'm like, okay, like maybe it's just because there's a crowd and whatever. And so last week I did the same thing. I was giving a lesson and he gassed out. He's had working 60 hours a week. So we had 20 minutes left and I just grabbed his club and within 15 minutes I was 150 miles an hour again. And I'm like, this used to take me months. Like this used to take me, well, not months, but weeks to get
Hmm.
back to this. Now I can, after all these, obviously the training and stuff like that, but just because the mechanical base is so well structured and now all the little things are tidied up
Hmm.
from just all the hypertrophy work and stuff like that, which I've never taken an off season that's been that long without touching a golf club. But I just found it very interesting to where now I'm like, there's even more to this. And now the rabbit hole gets deeper.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about fatigue management, because the fatigue management to me is like my background in sports performance. Fatigue management was very important because there's so many like regardless of what we do in training or recovery or life, it's all stress. And our body has a specific adaptation to that stress. Sometimes that's a positive adaptation, sometimes that's a negative adaptation. And I think now with like the proliferation of science-based or evidence-based training, fatigue management is a word that gets thrown around a lot and it makes me want to pull my eyes out of my face because people who aren't even training hard are talking about fatigue management.
Right.
When you mention fatigue management, I'm like, fatigue management. This fucking club's 300 grams.
Yeah.
Like, how does that play a role?
So fatigue management through the central nervous system, right?
Okay.
So when that 300-gram club is moving at 150 miles an hour over the course of 1 hour, 100 plus times, because the guys will hit
Mm.
120 balls, their heart rate's sitting at 150 to 170 generally for an hour straight.
What?
And oh
Are you
yeah,
serious?
oh yeah, like dude, like when we go, we go. Like
That's fucked.
I have like Kyle Berkshire. I remember the one time he was doing, we call them speed sessions. So you essentially you warm up, you do your general warm up, and then you basically go. And when you're green light to go, you're nonstop. Like it's every 20 seconds to 25 seconds, you're going for 45 minutes to an hour. Like I've hit 120 balls in 60 minutes. So
That's
that's a
crazy.
ball every 30 seconds.
Right.
Like Kyle's had his at probably 190 at like peak during hitting one of these sessions. So that's where when I said I was burning through 4,500 calories, you
Yeah,
know,
holy
and I was
shit,
losing
man.
weight. So that's kind of where this fatigue management part of it comes
Yeah,
in.
okay. Now it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so that's where, but the problem is the male ego. There's nothing bigger on a golf course than the male ego, or on a practice range or whatever, right? It's like, oh, just one more, just until you have like that one good one. And in long drives, so we're talking like general jockheads that haven't had any type of strength conditioning background for the most part. So they don't understand when enough is enough, right? It's you kind of have to teach them, okay, like just one more or just two more doesn't do you any good. It actually like goes backwards for you. And now you're going to be, it was, I learned this from chasing that ball speed record because it was basically I took, and this is like a baseball term, right? You chase this speed number for a month, but now you're paying the next 4 months because you can't really progress anymore. It's just you're recovering, trying to get back, but your fatigue is just you're burnt, you're toast. And so that's kind of where now I have my guys all on ball counts. So they basically are only allowed to hit so many balls. That's why when I said 15 to 20 balls all out.
Mm,
Normally, these guys would go in and just start going after it and go like 80, 90 balls in a row. And I'm like, but then you can only do that for so many weeks, and we have a whole season in front of us.
right.
And it's more noticeable to me now as I'm sitting back and watching, just as like a coach mostly. Other guys in the sport that are just, they spend all winter, they're like, oh, I'm gonna get faster, I'm gonna get faster, and then they're peaking in like February and I'm like, but the first competition's not until March. And then what do you do in September? Like if you're peaking in like you only have, it's kind of like Usain Bolt trying to break the world record in January when the Olympics is in July.
Right.
So that's where, I keep them it's frustrating to some of them for sure,
Of course.
because they see everybody else doing it. And I'm like, just trust me, like have a little faith here. I know what I'm talking about. I've been through the ringer. I've put myself through it. I've made the mistakes. I've bared the injuries.
Hmm.
Now I'm trying to help you avoid that and actually progress through your season and make it so you're actually peaking when we need you to peak. And then if you're fatigued after that, whatever, like season's over, who cares?
Right.
Right? So that's a lot of them. That's where the nutrition aspects come in, the sleeping comes in, the recovery modalities come in. I preach it the best I can to a lot of these guys. Some of them are on specific calorie intakes, macro intakes. All of them aren't. If they follow them exactly, I'm not quite sure. Obviously, we're not talking bodybuilders here, so I give them a general guide and I'm like,
Right.
hey, I'd like you to be somewhere within a couple hundred of this on a daily basis,
Hmm.
as far as calories go. So I'm trying to maximize their long-term proficiency instead of the whole golf industry is based on now, now, now. So the new driver comes out, oh, 30 yards. It'll get you 30 yards. It's been like that for 15 years. No
Right.
driver's ever been able to do that. These new speed systems, right? The peaking after 6 weeks. I've gone down the rabbit hole and studied them, and they have some great biomechanics behind them and stuff like that. But I'm like, where's the long term? Where's your long term proof that this is all sustainable? Because it's not. You can't, right? It's like I'm going to do a powerlifting meet every 6 weeks and look for progress every single time. Like, yeah, maybe the first two, but there's going to be a downfall to that along the way if you're trying to peak every 6 weeks. So that's where we got to ride the line because now when we get into competition season, right, I need them at 90-ish% the whole time.
Right.
And they want to go, obviously, they get the green light to go in the later rounds. So, in the qualifying rounds and stuff, I'm like, you're good enough, just balls in play, because that plays a factor too. So you got to hit a good ball in play. And
Hmm.
then you'll have enough energy when we get to the end of the day to then go all out. And, you'll only have 20 balls to do that. So it's not going to beat the crap out of you as long as you're getting your sleep, you're getting your food. so on and so forth.
Dude, that's so fascinating. Let's switch gears a little bit because you mentioned earlier on that you were getting your real estate license, and then you mentioned some sponsorships and prize money. Talk to me a little bit about the business of the sport, and like, are you working a full time job, or is it all golf?
Yeah, I still have my real estate license. It's been put on a little bit of a back burner. I'll still do a couple deals a year.
Mhm.
Um, I've gotten a lot into the charity corporate golf space because of what I do, the entertainment side of it. So I'll get asked to go put on a show or hit balls for a tournament to help raise money for charity, stuff like that. Large scale corporate outings. So that plays a factor. Coaching obviously is starting to move in the right direction. I kind of had my, he's still getting better, but essentially he replaced me as the best in Canada last year. I just happened to be his coach.
I love
So
that. I love that though. Like
yeah,
that.
but
That's
that's what I look for, right? It's
yep.
like, that for me was my like, okay, like I took a kid who was, has all the ability in the world, besides his work schedule, which is insane. Um, but I took him from 38th in the world to ninth in the world. So I was ninth in the world. Now I'm 18th. And, I'm like, hey, it's all like you had an awesome end of your year. You finished fourth at Worlds. You finished top four in the last two tour events. And I couldn't be happier because, that's why I'm there. That's, I didn't get it, but that's fine.
That's your
I know.
job. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I want you to beat me. Like, as much as, I'm there. But at the end of the day, I want you to gain what you took out of this and move forward with it. Um, and yeah, he's a competitor, which that's, he's not. If I had to give my one weakness, it's kind of like my mental side where I'll break where he won't. So I'm like, hey, if I can give you everything else that I do and you don't break, you might have a world title in your hands. So yeah, the financial side of it, there's lucrative opportunities. There's fun opportunities. Like when I got to go to Europe for 2 weeks last year, that was, more of a yes, I was paid to go do it, but it was one of those I'd otherwise not do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I got to go play golf with people and places and go to events, and I was just like almost a little imposter syndrome to the point where I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I belong here. These black tie dinners and stuff. But outside of like the competition stuff, there's not a lot of money in competing.
Mm.
To be absolutely, it's very much like powerlifting in that way. There's
Okay.
there's there's a little more money, but now powerlifting is also like obviously I still follow along, and the big events and things like that are having some prize money behind them now, similar to long drive. Like when I first started in long drive, the whole thing was because the prize money. Like first place at World was 250,000 American.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that was in 2008. Now, obviously, recession and sponsors and things like that have fallen off. Um, so last year, first place was $40,000. So not exactly, for me, also a factor of like, well, there's other ways for me to make money. So that wasn't high on my, to-do list at this point in time in my life in my 40s. But that was my big reason for getting involved when I first started because I was a 25-year-old kid and I'm like, I can hit a golf ball and win 250K. Like, well, yeah, let's give that a go.
Hell yeah.
And then when you look at the community, it's very much like powerlifting where like, obviously there's clicks. You have your clicks and everything. But everyone's there supporting each other for the most part, wanting everyone else to do great and even we had teams that were like, we're part of this team, you're part of that team, and we're trying to make like a social media thing out of it, and kind of like bring a little attention to it, kind of thing. And some guys want to play along, some guys don't. But I mean, I spent a week in Europe dressed up as a Canadian lumberjack. Like, like the whole handlebar mustache, plaid shirt, jean
Nice.
shorts, and it was for a show, and like they loved it, and it was one of the most watched YouTube videos that my friend Martin posted all year. So we're kind of like, okay, well, maybe that's going to get us an invite back and get to play with some pretty cool Like I got to walk 18 holes with Gareth Bale, the soccer player.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's just you get to go to these events where, a kid that grew up in the small little town I grew up in, I'm like, yeah, it was okay if you don't play hockey, get a job at the mill, and you're done. Like that's life. Well, I got a job at the mill, and then it shut down 3 months later. So
My
then
yeah,
like you change completely, right?
my only experience in Thunder Bay was I was stopped there on my way to Calgary, and it was so cold that the key fob to my car froze and wouldn't start my car. That's my experience with Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Yeah, that was 35 years, and I grew up in Nipigon, which is an hour outside of Thunder Bay. But yeah, that's 35 years of my life was there. Like that was just standard -40 every January for weeks on end.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that like you can find this niche sport, you can find that thing that lights you up. Like you found this thing that turned something in your brain on that was like there's more here. There's a rabbit hole. I can go down this. I can get interested in it. And that's always been coaching for me. It's always been fitness and nutrition. So I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And the fact that now you're able to make a living doing this thing and
Yeah.
you have an opportunity like when you look at your business right now as it stands where you have obviously some sponsorships, you have competing, you have coaching, you have corporate events, where do you see yourself taking this career, because there's a ton of money in golf as a sport.
Yeah, that's for me the coaching aspect I really enjoy. And I think the next step in golf, evolutionary wise, is going to be the nutrition side of it. Hence why I'm, going to get on stage and do this whole thing in 4 weeks. I really want to push that envelope and bring, I have some other things lined up that'll kind of fall into the same space. But it's making the awareness about not just because golf's one of those things you can play till you can't, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not like hockey or football or baseball where, there's a limiting factor on age at some point. Whereas golf, you can still enjoy it in your 70s and 80s. I mean, I had an uncle that played until he was 97, and then he had a
my
stroke. He had a stroke, and that's what took him out. He just couldn't because he had a
my
stroke at 97. Like,
my grandfather still plays. He's 88, I think.
yeah. And that's where, right? Like when you look at the general healthy, well taken care of individual, they can play till, they're much older. Obviously, golf has the weekend warrior who likes to go out and have fun, have their beers and all that stuff. But when you look at the older player, especially now that there's all the information available, right? The guys in their 40s, 50s, 60s, I have guys when I'm going to practice just coming over and chatting like health and nutrition. And I find that so fascinating because that never would have been a conversation, maybe even just because of my age 10 years ago. But now they see the gray hair and they're like, okay, well, he's probably, around 40, 50 something years old. And so they're more pro-empt to come to have that conversation and talk. Obviously I look a certain way too, but it's, they're more concerned. I don't want to say concerned, but they're more intuitive that how important it really is for their future. As far as playing the game at the level they want to play it as they kind of move on in age. And I think the other part of the golf industry that I'm really wanting to tackle is there's all this fancy malarkey out there for clicks and views and stuff like that, where I truly believe, especially through what I've just experienced over the past 5 months, where you could probably do 8 exercises 3 days a week and you'd be completely fine. You know,
Mm.
vertical pull, vertical push, horizontal push, hip flex, knee flex, elbow flex, and from each angle, and you're good to go. There's not really, if you cover all your joints and you take care of your general health as far as cardiovascular health goes, all the other fancy malarkey, I just don't find it to be absolutely necessary,
Hmm.
right? And then we get into like, okay, like, am I going to put a 50-year-old under a squat bar who's never squatted in his life? Probably not,
Probably not.
right? I'm going to throw him on a machine and he's going to move the weight back and forth, and that's going to work just fine, right? If he wants to learn how to squat and take the time and things like that, well, there's other factors that we have to look at if he's going to do that. But if we can get him on a pendulum or get him on a leg press or get him on a hack squat, that's a fixed apparatus, and he goes up and down with enough weight to create stimulus. That's going to be better than him spending an hour every time he goes to train trying to learn how to move the bar in the right spot, because everyone wants to progress. So it's kind of like, okay, well, why? I tell guys all the time, I'm like, yes, obviously, we come from a world that free bar and free weights and things like that were always, if you didn't do that, you weren't progressing.
Right.
But at that age, do you need to? Right?
No.
Like it's kind of that mindset where again the male ego is so strong, where I program guys in like chest press just on a machine, table. I don't even care, plate loaded, doesn't matter. Just put yourself through it. Like don't sit there and try and bench press and your elbows flared all to hell, and especially if they're online because I'm not around them, so I don't know their training age. They can
Mm,
tell me through the intake, but again, I've been in the gym for 15 years. Well, okay, I've never seen you like perform a bench press. So how do I know if your elbows are flared all to hell and you're going to rip something, or if you're doing it properly? Like
mm,
that's so I'd rather just caution on the side of safety and okay, get on a machine and let yourself move enough weight through the range of motion to create stimulus, and let's just move on. Like we're not trying to create any like magnificent chiseled type of physique. We're trying to get work done. And if
mm.
we can get work done over time and consistency, I don't see any real reason to have to do a whole lot more than 8 to 10 things.
I love that. I want to be mindful of your time, so I want to get
Sure.
into some quick hit questions.
Sure.
What is the furthest you've ever hit a golf ball?
457 in competition.
How does that rate against like the world record distance ever hit?
The world record, I believe, is 551 yards ever.
Holy fuck.
Yeah, in a tournament in, I believe, Nevada. I don't want to pretend like it wasn't hurricane conditions. I know the guy that did it. He's actually a good friend of mine. He's 6'8", 300 pounds, but he was a very good golfer in his day as well. But yeah, there's some things in play that the ground might have been quite hard, the wind might have been blowing quite hard, and but that's I can say outside of competition I've hit a ball further. I just don't know exactly how far it went.
How,
I have a good guess, but
how far can you hit a golf ball off of a Coke can
oh,
while smoking a cigarette?
oh, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't done it, because of course I've done it. We've done some like trick shot stuff in our day where I've hit a putter 300 yards. I've hit left-handed 300 yards. I've hit an upside down driver 300 yards. Yeah, like there's a whole entertainment piece that we kind of go through in this too, where you kind of have to be a little ambidextrous and stuff. So I was fortunate that my dad golfed left-handed, so I always just to be a dick basically would try and beat him left-handed, at least drive it further than him left-handed. And my dad wasn't exactly like a physical specimen by any means, so it wasn't really that difficult. I started doing it when I was like 13 or 14 years old. So that's where, and I get it all the time when I do these charity corporate things. You're like, oh, I bet you can't do that. And then I get up and do it, and they're just like, okay, never
I love
mind.
that. I love that shit.
Because you got to be an entertainer, right? That's the big part of it. You got to be part of the tournament in an entertainment factor, not just this big hulking dude that hits balls really far.
This isn't really a quick hit question, but it kind of just popped into my head. How much pushback are you getting from the integration of all the tech, the science, the like refined approach in a sport that is more or less recreational where guys just show up and do it?
It's it's becoming more, I think people are starting to understand the nuances that we're talking about a bit more. There's still like the gorillas that are just like, I go hit golf ball now.
Hmm.
And I get all the time, oh, I want to come for a speed session, and they think all these magical things are going to happen in a speed session. Where once in a while, don't get me wrong, like I'll get someone 20, 30 yards if their mechanics are really good and there's just something, not quite working that we figure out. Um, but as far as the golf world, anything in the tech side, there's always going to be the believers and the non-believers. And the non-believers have their very strong feelings about it. I don't know how they do because science is generally science. Physics is physics. But there's always people there's a term when we call it ground reaction force, right? It's the one word people say is like you push into the ground and the ground pushes back, which we know the ground doesn't actually push back. You're just not strong enough to move the earth, so then you got to go the other way.
Right.
Right? But there's people that I've seen them make videos and they take that like so to heart and they squat down and they just sit there and they're like, well, the ground's not pushing me back. I'm like, well, no, that's not what
You're
people are.
also not pushing into the ground when you're
Yeah,
sitting.
yeah. So there's always going to be that kickback in golf. As far as the equipment goes, obviously things have changed quite a bit, even from when I started. Like when I started, we were using like 80, 90 gram golf shafts that were like 2x4s. Now we're using basically bullwhips that are like 40 grams, super whippy, and just trying to use all the kinetic energy we can into the ball at that exact moment. And that's kind of I've seen it on the PGA Tour. I've seen it kind of like start moving along because like as soon as the tour starts doing it, then so on and so forth. But they obviously play for accuracy more than anything else. So
Mm,
but I mean, you look at the guys on tour now and how they look and how they're shaped versus, a guy hitting a ball off a Coke can with a cigarette in his mouth. He's still an icon by all means, but things are just different now. So that's kind of the way of the world, I guess.
yeah, for sure. So with your entire journey in your, your experience as a coach, as a competitor, if there was one message that you could have on a billboard on the side of a highway for everyone to see, what would it be?
Oh God, I really want to say you don't need to hit balls 4 days a week, but
I think it's
that's
a good
that that
message.
that's a long drive specific comment, derived from specific feelings. But the gym trumps everything. That would be my, if the mechanics are there, the gym trumps it all, and I'm walking living proof of it.
Well,
I can still bang with the best of them, and I'm going to be 42 in a month. There's not really many other guys in sports that are 42 that can pull that off, especially in a power game.
right.
So that's kind of I mean, the gym's there for you till you die if you want it to be.
I love that. Ryan, man, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes because I think anyone who's listening to this and has any interest in golf is definitely going to want to hit you up for
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
conversation. Um, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem, man. Pleasure.
Thanks. If everyone can make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.